Welcome back to another video, everyone. Today we have a little bit more of a gear focused video. So what we're going to be doing today is taking a look at these two cameras in particular. Both of these have made appearances on the channel before, so if you are a returning viewer, these will look familiar to you. This one is the Hasselblad 500CM, and this one is the 907X, specifically the CFV250C. A little bit of a mouthful. And the reason why I wanted to take a look at these two cameras in particular today was because I think that Hasselblad has done something very, very interesting with the 907X. They have decided to honor their heritage of old medium format film cameras and make these two cameras basically work together in a way. So I'll be going over both of these cameras. I'm going to do kind of a light overview of each one and then show how these can work together. So if you happen to already have a Hasselblad film camera lying around from the olden days, the 500, 501, 503, etc., and you've been thinking about getting one of the newer digital Hasselblad, the 907X, either the 50C like this one or their new 100C, which has that same 100 megapixel sensor that's in the X2D camera. I'm going to show you how these can kind of work together and how you can get some really interesting shots using either one. And by the way, if you are already experts in either one of these cameras or both, I will be putting in time codes for the chapters so you can kind of skip ahead or skip around with whatever it is that you're interested in learning about from this video. Also, if you stick around to the end of this video, I have a bonus tip for you that will show you how to determine when these cameras were made, if either you have one already or you're looking to pick one up yourself. So let's start with the 500CM. One of the things that Hasselblad has always been known for is its modular design. The whole camera body is actually made up of three main parts. So you have the film back, where the film is located, that can be detached. You have the camera body itself, which acts as the kind of gateway from the lens to the film for the light. And obviously you have the lens itself. So as you can see with the film body, there's your mirror in the center there. You can open this up for the access to the viewfinder and slide this off. This is entirely hollow. There's nothing in here. Well, there is something in here. You can also flip this up, as you see, and there's a little bit of a magnifying glass there. So this can really help with more specific focal points. If you really want to make sure that you're nailing focus, that can be a really useful tool. So you just clip that back down. You'll fold this back up for right now. And so this is your film body here. If I press the shutter button here, what you'll notice is that it's see-through. Other than the single lens here that you see when I release the shutter, there's really not much in this body. It's really just a pass-through point for the light to get to the film. I like how simple this design is, and I think that it was very effective in kind of bringing a more minimal aesthetic to a larger format film. And then once we wind our side here, then the mirror is back, we are cocked and ready for another shot. Probably the most popular lens that you'll find on these old Hasselblads is this 80mm f2.8 lens. So these were all back in the day made by Carl Zeiss. Very, very good optical quality. If you can find these in good condition like this one, I mean, to this day, this is still a very good optically precise lens that I actually shoot digital with sometimes, and I'll get into that a little bit later and show you how to do that. So one of the key things to keep in mind for these film cameras is, as you saw, when you wind or when you release the shutter, the mirror doesn't come back down. There's a small little, I'm not really sure what to call this. There's a small little metal piece here that you can see is tilted to the side. And if I wind the camera, you'll see that it actually changes rotation. One of the biggest things that you need to keep in mind for this camera is that when you are kind of putting all these pieces together, is that they all need to kind of fit and make sure that they're all primed, if you will, for lack of a better phrase. For example, with this one right now, because I've already fired the shutter button, it's now locked and the mirror is locked up currently. You'll notice on the side here that this little indicator is red. This is very important because on our film body, or film back rather, we also have an indicator, and this one is black. That is basically indicating that there is no film in this right now, which is fine because, again, this is for demonstration purposes. And actually, I'll go ahead and take this apart. So we have our dark slide. So we'll pull that out. That protects the film from being exposed. So if I had film here, this is where that would be exposed. And then we can do this. And this is where you wind up your film. So again, this takes medium format 120 film. You have your spool on the side that eventually you'll move to the other side as kind of a primer. You'll load in your new roll of film here. You'll feed it around the front here and then back to the spool on this side. So here, I'll show you that. You can take our old spool, put it on this side here, push that down. And then once you add the new spool of film around here, you'll wrap that around, feed it in, and then wind it to be the proper location to be all lined up within the film back. And then you'll insert this back into our casing here. We'll lock that down, insert our slide. And then what you'll do is you'll wind this until it eventually will stop, and then you'll have a #1 indicator on this. Not all film backs, like the really, really old ones, I think don't actually have a film position indicator, but this one does. So once it'll stop automatically, and you'll have a 1 there showing that you've got, that you're shooting your first frame. And then your indicator here will also be fully white. And this is another indicator of how far you've advanced your film here. So there's a lot of little visual cues that Hasselblad has incorporated into his camera to make sure that you are not messing things up. That said, I still mess things up on these all the time. Anyway, so back to what I was saying before, you have the indicator on the side, so you want these colors to basically match. If this has film in it and it's loaded and primed, ready to go, that little dial there will indicate that it'll show white. So when that's white, you want to make sure that you that you cock your shutter again. So now this is white as well. And then you know that these two are good to go. You can put that back. And then likewise, you want to make sure that your lens is also primed. There's this little notch that you can see here, and this is currently indicating towards that little red dot. That's very important. Sometimes what can happen is that if this triggers and fires, what can happen is that if your body is primed and you try to attach the lens again, it won't lock in. It just won't do anything. And especially if you're buying these cameras off of like eBay or some third-party site, that can happen where you think your camera's broken and it may not be. So all you want to do is you want to get a very small little screwdriver, be very careful. You really, really, really do not want to slip and scuff anything on the inside here, but you want to basically turn that to prime the shutter. Remember that all of Hasselblad's lenses are on a leaf shutter system. That means that the shutter's in the lens itself. It's not in the body. There's no shutter in the body. The way that you'd think of like DSLRs, SLRs, Canon, Nikon, whatever, they all have their shutters in the body for the most part. For Hasselblad, the shutter is in the lens. So you want to make sure that the spring is wound and set for that within the lens itself. Otherwise, this will not attach back to the body. So it just clicks into place like that. Let me put the viewfinder back on because that's annoying me. And that just slides in like so. And you've reassembled your camera. Now the other thing is that when you're actually shooting with this camera, there is no built-in light meter. So you will have to use either your phone or an external light meter to make sure that you're getting exposure correct. And how you adjust the settings is, if you notice, there's no adjustments on the body of the camera itself. It's all on the lens here. So what you'll do is this little latch here will kind of decouple the aperture and the shutter speed. So if you can see, we got indicators for the aperture and the shutter speed on the lens itself. So you'll want to bring this down, and then you can rotate this and change this to line up. And then it's kind of cool because then once you do that, this can lock in. And then you have equivocal exposures depending on if you want to change the shutter speed or the aperture. You know that it's the same exposure, or equivalent exposures, excuse me. So let's say that I checked my metering, and for my scene, I needed a 5.6 at 1/60th of a second. But maybe a 5.6 is a little too shallow depth of field for me. I don't want to go for something longer. Well, all I need to do is just move this over. I don't need to recalculate anything in my head or do anything like that. It's already kind of set. So now I can do an f16 at 1/8 of a second. Kind of slow. Maybe that's going to be too slow for the environment that I'm in. And again, move it back, etc. The nice thing is that on here too, it shows you kind of a visual indicator of how far or of how shallow your depth of field is going to be. So again, as we move closer to f2.8, this becomes very, very shallow with these two indicators here with the distance along the focal ring. And then if we move this out, you can see that expanding out. Now this isn't really unique to Hasselblad. A lot of film cameras did this in the past as a way to visually let you know kind of what to expect from your shot, since obviously there was no live preview or anything like that other than what you saw through the viewfinder. So that's a really brief overview of the Hasselblad 500CM, kind of basic operation. So now let's talk about the 907X, the modern medium format digital camera. So currently on this camera, I have the 28p lens, which I've seen in a couple previous videos now. I'm just going to take the the lens shade off. So one of the greatest things I think about this camera design is just how compact this is for a medium format camera. I mean, if you look at kind of the older H series from Hasselblad, those are big cameras. Those are studio cameras almost exclusively. It would be very, very difficult to go out into the field or do any kind of, street photography or anything else with those. This makes it very, very simple to do. And once again, this is an entirely modular design, very similar to this. So when you take this digital back off, you may notice already this is very similar to the film back on the film camera. And we take our lens off here. This technically is the 907X. This is the camera, if you will. So all that we have here are some connectors for the lens for autofocusing, some connectors to the back for the digital back. We have our shutter here on the front, an adjustment ring for the shutter speed and aperture, and then a button on the side here which will toggle back and forth between the aperture and the shutter speed. So by default, this will adjust the aperture, and then if you hold this side button down and then move the dial here, that will control the shutter speed. And then this button here is just the lock for the lens. So really, when you buy these cameras, obviously you're not paying much for this, right? This isn't that impressive, not much to it. What you're really spending your money on is the incredible digital back. And this is where I think Hasselblad was really intelligent in how they designed this system. So again, just reassembling our camera here. On the side of this, we have our battery compartment. On the CFV 250C, which is again this one, you have 2 SD card slots. But I know that on the newer 100C, you actually have 1 terabyte of internal SSD storage, which is the same that you have on the X2D, and an additional card slot. I forget off the top of my head if that's a CF Express Type B card or if it's an SD card, but either way, you have built-in memory on the new 100C. Otherwise, for the 50C, which is this one, you have the 2 SD cards. And then turning it on, you just hold the little play button here. This springs to life, and now you have your menu on the back where you can adjust all of your settings, f-stop, shutter speed. You can do that through a touch interface here as well. You don't have to use the physical controls on the camera itself. You can do this all through the touch screen if you so choose. And again, modifying the ISO here. Another key difference is that on the new 100C, your minimum ISO is actually down to 64, whereas on the 50C, the minimum ISO is 100. So if that's something important to you that you really want to get as low of an ISO as you can, you may want to opt for the 100C instead. And again, kind of the standard Hasselblad menu through here. I love the icons. They're very minimal, they're very simple, but I think very effective at communicating what they need to communicate. All right, so now, how do you use these two systems together? This is, I think, my favorite part of having both of these cameras, and why I still use both is because I can use these in conjunction with one another, and I think get some really interesting results. So the nice thing is that Hasselblad hasn't made this too difficult. There's a couple tips and tricks, but the basics are very simple. So you're gonna take your 500 series film camera, remove the film back. We're going to take your 907X, remove the digital back, set off to the side. And you are simply going to put the digital back onto the film camera. Congratulations, you now have a digital camera on a vintage film body. Now, you may be thinking, is it really that simple? Yes and no. So right away, I can turn on our digital camera. What I'll do is go into the menu here. You'll notice an icon here for camera body. We'll click on that, and this is already set to 500. Which is what this camera is, but if you have a different model, you can choose which model you have there. So keep that at 500. Go back, let's just boost our ISO to 400, why not? Take off our lens cap. Look at something. Click, and there's an image. That actually is kind of cool. Interesting. So in order to just take photos with the digital back on a film camera, that's really all you need to do. But like I said, there are some tricks. Now, one of the most important things to remember about this though, is that what you see through the viewfinder will not exactly be what you get on the digital back. And the reason for that is there's actually a crop factor that you have to account for with the digital back. And what I mean by that is if you take a look, this is the digital sensor here, right? So you can see that surface area. And this whole square is basically the amount of light that is being let in from the 500 camera. So if you notice, these are not the same sizes. So you're not actually capturing all of the surface area, you're only capturing what this sensor is going to catch from that. So you're going to have a crop on both the top and the bottom. Now I believe that the 100C actually comes with a like a viewfinder mat that you can put in your viewfinder that will show you the crop already. The 50C does come with one, but it's sticky on one side. So it's basically, if you put it on your viewfinder, kind of that's it, it's just stuck there. Well, because I still use this to shoot film, I didn't want something that was permanently on there. So I had a coworker of mine actually 3D print this little thing for me. I just found this online. You can look for these. If you want to buy these off of eBay, they could be like $20 for some reason. But again, if you know someone with a 3D printer, or you want to mock this up yourself, or are otherwise pretty handy with making things, you can make one of these, and this will actually help kind of guide your compositions. This isn't exactly what's going to be captured on the digital camera, but it's close enough, so I can kind of eyeball it from there. So you can kind of see here, these inner lines are what will be, or what's in this very center, in between those two center lines. That's what's going to be captured on the digital back here. So again, we can just place this, whoops, we can just place this right here. And the nice thing is that I can just leave this in here. I don't have to worry about taking this out every time I want to shoot film. That can just stay there. And I just slide that back on top there. So now I have a very minimal way to understand what my composition is going to be with the digital back, and I can still see the full frame for if I'm shooting film. Now, because of that, let's say you don't have something like that to kind of mock up what your composition is going to be. You want to make sure you get your focus absolutely correct, because again, 50 or 100 megapixels, you really want to make sure that your photo is sharp. So you want to do a live view from your digital back. You can do that, but it is a little bit more involved. So as you see, if the camera is ready to go, there's the barn doors here, right, which are closed, obviously to protect the light from getting to the film normally. And you have your mirror that's sending the light up through the viewfinder. So nothing's going to show up on the digital back. So if I hit the LV down here, live view, it's just going to be black. There's nothing here that's going to show. So how do you make sure that you are actually getting the composition that you want? Let me first say that for this, again, this is absolutely doable, but it is far easier if you're doing this on a tripod. The reason for that is because there's a couple settings that we need to change, and in doing so, you may move or your composition may shift slightly, and it becomes a little bit more hard to make sure that you're getting exactly what you think you're getting. But if you're like me and you really don't like using tripods, again, this is fine, this can still work for you. So what you're going to do is you're going to go back to the menu system, select film body, or excuse me, camera body, and tap on that. You're going to scroll all the way down to any, and then use the electronic shutter. So what this is going to do is, rather than using the leaf shutter that's in the lens, it's going to use the digital camera's electronic shutter to take the photograph. Then you're going to come back to your lens. You're going to select whatever aperture that you want, because that will still influence the photo. But then you're going to move the shutter speed over to B, or bulb mode. So let's say I've picked 5.6 and we're at bulb mode. So now what we're going to do is this little lever on the side here, this will be the mirror lockup. So for example, if you're shooting a landscape at a slower shutter speed, or you're one of those people that prefer to use like a shutter release cable, what you can do also is you can use this to lock up the mirror. So now I can't see anything through here. I'm not sure if you're able to see that or not, but so now we have our mirror locked up. And then on the side here next to our shutter, we're actually going to move this little lever down, and then we're going to press our shutter. And if you notice, that locks the shutter open. Now we can go back to here and click LV for live view. And now we have a live view of our composition. So again, if you have your camera mounted on a tripod and you're looking at setting up like a really nice landscape scene, this can be invaluable to making sure that you're getting the composition that you want, you're nailing focus and everything else. Another nice thing about this is that with the back here, you can have focus peaking. So what that means is that if you are trying to find focus, it becomes a lot easier to do so, because you'll actually have a highlight of, the default is orange. So there's actually like a highlight of orange around the subject that's in focus. You can change the color to other things like yellow or cyan if that's easier for you, but that way you can make sure that you're getting focus on the camera. So with this locked up now, once you kind of get your focus and everything else sorted, you'll see on here this kind of orange dot. Now that's your shutter. So you can go back and change your shutter speed to be whatever you want on this back here. And then when you're ready to take your composition, you can just tap that, and now you have your image. So there's kind of two different ways of shooting with this. Like I said, the one is through using the live viewfinder and an electronic shutter to make sure that you're getting the composition that you want and nailing focus. Or you can go back to that camera body, select the camera body that you have, 500 in my case, and then go ahead and shoot like you would just a normal film camera and have your digital image on the back. So that is a quick overview on how to use the 907X 50C on your old Hasselblad 500 series film body. Now, the other way that you can use your old gear with new technology is that Hasselblad also has an adapter for these old lenses. So if I take my digital back and I put this back on the 907X camera, but let's say that I, again, really love this lens, which I do, and I want to use this lens on this camera body. Or let's say I picked up a lens alone and I don't have a camera or a film camera body because I know I'm never going to shoot film, but I like the way that these lenses look. Well, Hasselblad has this lens adapter here that you can purchase. For Hasselblad, this isn't all that expensive. Note that I said for Hasselblad. But what you can do with this adapter is this basically mimics the length of the old Hasselblad 500 cameras to make sure that the focal distance is still correct. So I can take off my new XCD lens. I can take my 80mm 2.8 lens. And really, this is just an empty tube. There's nothing in here, right? So you will still need to focus manually. Obviously, this doesn't magically give autofocus to this lens or anything like that. But you can attach the lens here and then to the digital body. And it's a bit more cumbersome now, but now I can use this lens. So I have all of the optical performance of these old lenses, the kind of slight distortions that are there, that kind of more vintage film look without the grain maybe. Now again, you will be using exclusively the electronic shutter in the body. There is no way to leverage the leaf shutter in here other than the aperture settings. So it really doesn't matter actually what your shutter speed is set to on the lens itself. All that it's going to be paying attention to is the aperture. But to make sure that it does pay attention to the aperture, so you need to do one more thing. Once you set the aperture, anything above f2.8, since that's wide open for this lens, there's this little lever here that you need to press in. And if you see, the aperture is now closed down to where we want it to be. So this is used on the old film cameras to almost give like a preview of the aperture. You don't need to set this every time that you take a shot with the old film cameras, but now we have the appropriate amount of light and also the depth of field that we want set with the lens, and that will hit the camera body correctly. So again, I can take my photo and we have it here on the back. Likewise, because Hasselblad is using the X mount for all of their new cameras, we can also take this off and use this on our X2D. Same lens mount, so you can mount that up. And now I have my vintage 80mm lens on my modern X2D with the 100 megapixel sensor. So what's the point of all of this? I think that in an era of camera manufacturers that are kind of forgetting about their past or trying to move forward and not allowing you to use the older technology that they developed, it was a really brilliant move on Hasselblad to actually allow you to use these systems together interchangeably in some way. You know, a lens adapter is nothing new or novel or unique to Hasselblad, but I think that combining the digital back with the old film bodies was a stroke of genius. Having the same kind of design language and similar materials even, you get an experience that in my opinion is just fun to use. I've gotten some shots with the digital back on the film camera that I really enjoy. Because of that kind of older lens look, things aren't super precise and sharp. And while that can be a really great thing if you want that level of detail and that really high fidelity photograph, there is that kind of feeling that you get with the older lenses that you can't quite match with digital technology. So all in all, I'm really happy that Hasselblad did this. As someone that got into medium format film photography back in college when I got my Hasselblad 500EL, I still remember the first time that I saw my photographs on medium format film and I was blown away with just how different the look of them was compared to the 35mm film that I was shooting for the rest of my classes. So to be fair, yes, this is absolutely a bulky setup if you want to try to have your digital back on the film body and just shoot digitally all day. It's slower, it's more cumbersome, so I don't think that it suits everyone for every situation. But if you kind of know what to expect from your day and you can make it work, I think that it's a really rewarding experience, and it's really fun to be able to, again, utilize some of this old gear in new and innovative ways. I think I'll do a video in the future where I take the digital back on the film camera body and go out and just shoot with that for the day. So if you'd like to see that again, please do subscribe to check that video out in the future. Now, I also promise you at the end of this video a way to kind of tell if you get some of these old cameras that you can tell when these were made. Now, as a quick disclaimer, I didn't figure this out. I got this from a website whose link I will put down here, and that will kind of go into more detail into how this works. But effectively, on the back of these cameras, you have your serial number, which is generally 2 letters and then followed by a series of numbers. And the 2 letters are very important into determining when this camera is actually manufactured. So if you want the full backstory on this, again, I highly recommend that you go visit that link to get the full history and the story on this. But the quick TLDR is that Victor Hasselblad was inspired from Kodak to basically kind of create a magic word to encode some of this data in a slightly sneaky way. So he came up with a magic code word of his own, which was VH Pictures, Victor Hasselblad Pictures. And each one of those letters corresponded with a number. So V for 1, H for 2, P for 3, and so on. So on the back of this camera body, I have RS. R and S, so 80. So this camera was made in 1980. Obviously, when they were working on these, they weren't really considering, the 2000s. So it just is the last 2 numbers of the year. But that's how you can figure it out. And the film backs have something very similar. So again, they have that letter code and then the numbers. So again, this one is also RS. So this was made in 1980. So that can be a really good indication that this was the original film back that came on this camera. I'll be honest, I don't know if the serial numbers should match exactly, because I would expect that the serial numbers would be different for the body versus the camera back. But what should match is that if you take out this insert, you'll notice here at the top on the back here that there's a number. So this is 924. That should correspond with the last 3 digits of this casing, which this one is 924. So again, you know that this is the original insert for this casing. So if you want to go on eBay and try to look at getting one of these yourself, you can take a look at that and kind of know, A, how old is this camera? And B, are these kind of the original parts that all came together, or was this kind of a Frankenstein of a camera that was assembled from disparate parts? Ultimately, does it really matter? Probably not. As long as the things are working properly together, then who cares if they're not necessarily matching? But I know that some people are very particular about those things and they want kind of that complete set. Maybe they're willing to pay up a little bit more for that. So that can be a way to determine that as well. So a very heavily gear focused video today, but I hope that you enjoyed. If you learned something from this video, I would really appreciate a like on the video and subscribe if you're new here. Also, let me know in the comments down below. Do you like this kind of product overview of some of the gear that I have, or do you want to see something else? I'm always open to suggestions, so please let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.